Hi, welcome to Chapter 6 of the Leadership Coronicle Series. As usual, I'm talking to you live from Cambridge, UK. It's a rainy day here today and a bit chilly. And today is our last live webinar before next week's finale. It's been an interesting experience where we learned a lot, made some interesting connections, and it was for us a true test of perseverance. These webinars take some effort to be prepared, and I am very motivated today because I'm bringing you some very interesting learning. The series so far followed a logical sequence which culminates in what we will discuss today in Chapter 6. And we had to update the topics as we went along over the last 2 months with the rapid developments and the required learning for every phase of the corona crisis. I can't thank you enough really for supporting us so far. I can see some names joining us of some people who have been following us all the way from Chapter 1 until today, so about 7 weeks in a row. Big thank you to all of you for watching, for chatting, and for sharing. Next week is the season finale. We will be hearing about the challenges, this time from employees' perspectives. We would have been hearing from leaders over the last 2 months, and it would be the perfect opportunity to end the series by listening to what people are experiencing with their leaders. So during this crisis and now through the transition, give them the opportunity to listen to what they have to say. What are your challenges as a workforce? What would make the transition better for you? What have your leaders missed out on during the crisis? All of these concerns, you will get the chance to share live next week. Of course, we need to remember not to turn this into a complaining platform and not name names. The objective is to give leaders a lesson, this time by making them listen to the other side of the story. I'm expecting a big number of participants next week, so I recommend that you register the earliest possible. And if you happen to be listening to us today, watching us, and you're in leadership position, and you're serious about really knowing what was going on with your teams, encourage them to participate next week and watch and learn from what they have to say. Let me see. Please remember to drop your questions and your comments in the live chat window. As usual, you got used to this and you've been brilliant at participating. Hit the subscribe button to follow us on the YouTube channel or visit webinars.leadership.com. There's going to be some interesting surprises there over the next few weeks. Sign up for future support events. We will do our best to keep helping you manage the transition as we go back to work. If you wish to connect with me on LinkedIn, it's Dr. Antoine Eid, and I've already connected with a lot of you. A summary of the series over the last 2 months. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the objective of the Leadership Coronicle was to provide a free business support platform that helps people make the right reflections through the corona crisis. Big questions in the beginning of the crisis, some we managed to answer and some are still not answered. And now we entered the phase of slow transition to a post-corona period. In the first 3 chapters, we discussed the importance of understanding the neurobiology of fear and trauma and how this is affecting the performance of your teams. The learning from these chapters were reminding you as leaders of the necessity to be emotionally intelligent, to lead with empathy, and to open honest communication channels. We also focused on the importance of identifying emerging talents. That was key during this period, emerging talents and skills, and nurturing them through and beyond this crisis. The advice was to use the right assessment tools to identify 2 things: behavioral changes and also brain preferences, so you can plan people's development. And my offer to you still stands, to give you my objective advice on how to do this. So please send me an email or message me on LinkedIn so we can talk about this. We then had an intermission session where we managed to interview 9 leaders in a Zoom meeting. They shared their experience through the crisis and how they learned and they've reinvented and transformed their business and reframed capabilities. It was a very interesting episode, and we had a lot of engagement through that episode. You can watch the rerun on webinars.leadership.com, and you can watch all the other reruns there as well. The session then inspired an article which I posted on LinkedIn. The title was 9 Lessons the COVID-19 Crisis Taught Leaders About Organizational Immunity. You can find that article on LinkedIn. Last 2 weeks in chapters 4 and 5, we encouraged you to start thinking about the purpose of your organization. Not only in terms of your business profits, but also the impact that you have the opportunity right now to leave on the world. We also went through an interactive exercise, and thank you very much for putting a lot of brilliant input there, where we used our collective imagination to forecast the potential threats of the post-corona period and how we can transition there safely. Today, we will discuss the implications of everything we've covered on the business strategy. Is your business strategy taking into consideration the big threats that we mentioned last week and the sudden disruptions? And how can you prepare for these? Let us start by defining a quick definition to what strategy is. The basic purpose of a business strategy is to take the company towards its reason for existing, whether that's profit or charity or service or any other purpose. It also plans how to utilize the resources to create a viable business case that will serve that purpose. There are different strategy models. Some are very robust and they're used widely around the world by organizations. These models study the market opportunities and threats, mostly in terms of micro and macro factors like market, regulations, technology, competition, product design, distribution, financial planning, etc. And it also prepares for potential contingencies. These models work very well despite the fact that uncertainty in business has always been there. So these strategies help prevent damage or reach a safe pre-planned outcome. What these models, however, did not take into consideration are the risks that are bigger than the normal ones. And the coronavirus crisis is a big global example of a high-level, unpredicted risk that affected almost every organization in the world in a way or another. 2 things we need to consider here. 1, Have these classic strategy models contributed to the world not being ready for a major crisis? Big question. And the second point is, what will or are we going to see in new business strategy models that will take into account these fast developing risk factors? Let's start with the first question. Why weren't most organizations prepared for a major risk or a major crisis? The first factor is because the existing strategy models deal with the organizational risks and not with the systemic risks. By systemic risks, I mean any risk that can disrupt a whole system. We are too busy thinking of how we can eliminate or overcome obstacles to make some more money, while we managed through that process to put a whole system at risk. And again, by a whole system, I mean global systems like nature, like health, like society, and so on. It is human greed sometimes that makes us want our immediate benefit, even if we see future damage for others. And that sometimes includes our immediate children and grandchildren. So we've identified the first fault in the existing strategic model. It does not take into account systemic risks. The second factor is we have seen some organizations and governments have solid crisis management policies that help prevent more damage caused by the global crisis. But what we haven't seen much is policies that prevent those damages from happening. What are we occupied? What is the world occupied with right now? Going back to a normal economic cycle. What will prevent what happened from happening again? We haven't seen any big meetings or resolutions or strategy after several months of crisis. Are we returning slowly now to an old defective strategic thinking model? And is there a fault with contemporary leadership? The second question we asked is, will we see a new perspective on business strategy that can predict crisis or eventually prevent crisis? I have, over the last few weeks, seen some shy attempts from major strategic players and major strategic consultants around the world to analyze some of the potential risks, and sometimes even through a one-dimensional aspect, and some attempts at designing basic strategic models to push leaders to consider some bigger risks. For example, some push for meeting the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, some for the Paris Agreement, some for the workforce changes, etc. But none of these basic models is a complete one. I have also seen a lot of reactive policy measures, mostly related to how we deal with another epidemic outbreak. And that's understandable. The priority right now is health and safety. But what is essential at the moment is asking all the what-if questions. Together, last week, we went through a 30-minute exercise where we managed to imagine around 40 big risks that can disrupt the whole world system. If you remember some of them, we listed big technologies, data security, nature, or climate change, virus outbreaks, wars and crimes, society, and the new worker profile. And we listed them as potentially big systemic risks. Does your strategy take into consideration both the organizational and systemic risks? That's the important question to answer right now. Let me show you what we came up with over the last few weeks. What you will see is a demo of what is a much more developed strategy rethinking framework. So we're showing you a part of that just for the sake of having more clarity through an online broadcast. You're all welcome to connect with me after so I can take you through a bigger demo. But the objective of this is to try to come up with a framework that takes into consideration different factors, more factors, all the factors if possible, although impacting factors differ between industry and organization, but also a mix of short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy, and a mix of systemic risks and organizational risks. Let me show you the model right now, and we can go through it quickly. That's the Strategic Rethinking Framework, SRF. And I'm going to start with, I've had to remove all the labels from the model right now, but every single bubble you see or node you see already has a label. And what this is trying to do is take into consideration what you see now is 30 different factors, organizational and systemic factors, that can affect our future as an organization and how to plan for them. So I'll start by pressing the strategy as a strategy post COVID-19, and we're studying here 5 different elements. People is one element. What are the changes when it comes to the workforce and leadership, profiles and structure? The second one would be our business model. What are the changes required in the business model? Building an adaptable, responsive, and anticipative business model. The third aspect is the market itself. And here you see a lot of different factors. Some are directly affecting the organization and some are more affecting the system itself. Remember the conversation about systemic and organizational. And the other factor is technology, the adoption of technology as a response to crisis, and the disruption risks that it carries. And the last factor is the product redesign strategies to address new markets and new distribution channels. We all went through a lot of learning, our different journey through this crisis, but this model is trying to put everything together in a single model. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So if we randomly go to people, in that section, the strategy would be analyzing requirements from a people's perspective over the coming period. What can we expect, including all the threats that we spoke about last time. We spoke about changes in worker profile. We spoke about working remotely. We spoke about use of technology. We spoke about the threat of AI and robots and technology on people's job security and job availability. All of these, we put them for you here in this model. Then if we take first one, for instance, and that would be workforce profile. What have we observed? Now, we spoke a lot over the last 7 weeks. What have we observed about the changes required in workforce profile, the emerging talents, and the needed future skills? And these will lead to 3 different layers of thinking. One is the responsive strategy. Short term, how did we deal with it? And here, most organizations were basically, we were occupied with protecting and providing health and safety. Another action is providing adequate technology so that we don't disrupt the work while people are working from home. And 3, we also put strategies in place with support from governments to keep supporting people financially through this period. So this is first dimension. Second dimension, that's more medium term. What have we learned? What can we rethink when it comes to workforce profile? Have we observed, and how do we keep observing behavioral changes? Are we using assessments to measure behavioral changes? And are we redesigning job roles, job descriptions, and worker profiles to meet these new requirements? That's medium-term strategic thinking. If we go a bit longer term, what can we reframe and reinvent when it comes to workforce profile? Short term, changes in recruitment process, changes in job requirements. Do we have new HR systems? Are we working on new HR and selection systems in place? Changes in selection criteria. And third is developing those emerging talents. What kind of development plans do we have for these people that are long-term? So that's just an example of one thing, one aspect. If we go to another one, leadership. We've seen a lot of different leadership behavior right now, from governments, from CEOs, from directors, from people who were at somewhere in the middle or the bottom of the structure who emerged through this crisis. Have we analyzed leadership behavior, and are we planning future skills? The first layer, as usual, short term. What's the response? What's the immediate response? Do we recognize the threat and respond? And then there you put your own list of different actions that apply to your organization. Do we have a crisis leadership team in place? We led remotely, and we led emotionally. These were the things that were required after the shock. Medium term, we are in medium term right now. What are we learning, and what are we rethinking? Are we analyzing response behavior? Have people done well responding to crisis, or has leadership done well responding to crisis? Action 2. Are we examining leadership approach? You saw people leading differently through this crisis. We saw different levels of emotional intelligence. Are we examining these? And 3, evaluating communication. How did the communication go? Who was more communicative? Who was more honest, more transparent? Who got people more committed and more engaged? So just to recap quickly, just to take you through the logic behind this. So you start with your overall value, your overall purpose of where you want to reach. And then you consider all the possible threats and risks under 2 categories. These more systemic risks and the more organizational risks. Put everything you can there. That software we built can help you put everything in a very quick and user-friendly way. And then once we recognize all of these risks, and that needs to keep being updated all the time. We move from there to thinking about how do I respond, what do I learn, and how can I reinvent? And under each one of these three categories, three responses, there's a list of your own actions of what you're planning to do. You can add different layers there, such as who do I assign this to? What is this going to cost me? And can I study different scenarios within that same factor or within that same action? That's basically what we were able to come up with over the last few weeks. There's a big need for more comprehensive strategic models right now that do not only measure strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but also study those opportunities, those threats at a more global and systemic level. Of course, you can always here search for something, search for people, and it takes you there for more clarity and gives you a description of every step. That's basically what we would propose as a comprehensive strategic rethinking framework. Very happy to engage in a conversation with you to help you understand how this works. You don't have to use this model. It's just a framework as an example. The idea is to push you to think of all the risks. We've all seen what Corona crisis has done to businesses. Suddenly, are we going to go through that same pitfall again? I need to move from that browser right now back to the presentation. We have a couple of slides before I wrap up. Just a second. Presentation. And transition. That's it. What's the learning from this model? Let me take you to the learning. 7 advices for leaders who are trying to rethink and have a strategic shift at the moment. 1. Take into consideration all the possible risks. We demonstrated live last week that strangers who met through a YouTube platform were able to think together and come up within 30 minutes, with 40 different big risks. So imagine what a team can do together. 2, divide risks into organizational and systemic. That's what we haven't been doing, and that's what most likely has led to most organizations in the world not being ready when the Corona crisis started. 3, plan how to defend against all the factors. Don't miss any of them. Inject simulated scenarios in your organization. Increase organizational immunity. We spoke about this last week. 4, plan short-term, medium-term, and long-term. 5, plan for different scenarios for every risk. It is complicated, I understand, but that's what it takes now to deal with a fast developing world where there's a lot of disruptions, there's a lot of risks. 6, build a culture of ongoing reinvention. And 7, integrate global policies into your organizational strategy. That would be my advice to end this series and help you reflect on the way forward. We went through a catastrophe, but in a way, there's a lot of blessing in disguise, a lot of learning through this. I've witnessed a lot of organizations, a lot of people reinvent themselves right now. And by that, it doesn't mean that we need to reborn and reinvent are two different things. We don't have to start all over again every time. That actually reminds me of something I posted on LinkedIn last week and 2 weeks ago, actually, and I received a lot of comments from you, interesting comments. I asked a question. These 4 lines that you see are equal in length. But which one takes you the longest distance? And we had different answers. Most people answered line 1, and that is the correct answer. And you can see it on the ruler. It takes you to 10 centimeters. But what I meant by this, I was making an analogy about life in general and how we manage our lives and our businesses. We all get to live. Most of us are lucky to get an equal amount of time. And our life and our journey unfolds through our experiences, through the things that happen in our lives. What differs in where we reach is the learning in each journey. So line 1 represents the fastest journey, the longest journey, and that represents fast learning and fast adaptation. People and organization who learn quickly while moving forward instead of going backwards and starting all over again. These are the people and the organizations that reach the longest distance. Line 2 represents a lot of people around us that we know and we met through this crisis, and a lot of organizations who have to recreate themselves every time. You know, you meet people sometimes and you meet them 10 years later and they're just telling you the same stories in different scenarios. And you feel there is almost no learning there. Falling into the same mistakes every time and repeating, but through different scenarios, with different people, with different experiences. A lot of organizations left the market during this period because of that. The inability to learn, the inability to move forward. We don't have to start all over again every time. The rest of the lines represent progress with slower learning. There's a lot of up and downs. There's a lot of learning and fixing, but that's where most of us are. And we've discovered that through this crisis. We've learned a lot of things. We've reflected, we walked, we exercised, and we had a chance to learn a lot and reinvent things and move forward. So I hope you are in a position of learning. We are in an amazing position right now where we can learn and rethink things, and we don't get that chance all the time. That's it for me. I got a bit philosophical at the end, but I'd like to leave you with these thoughts. Now is the time to think bigger. Think about your own influence from our small corners of the world, influence on the whole world. And that's it. I'm going to leave you to ask your questions or put your comments if you have any. If not, thank you very much for being with me through these 2 months. Next week is, as I told you, is the finale. Please attend, ask people you know to attend. Let's open the microphone for people to just share the frustrations from leadership through this crisis and through the transition now, and how we can use those as a learning for leaders listening to us. I want to thank the team at Leadership Consultants, the research team, and the team at SODECO Solutions who have been managing these webinars for us. Thank you very much. Thank you for the feedback also on the framework. Let me know if you need any help with the framework, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.